Sarah Martinez had always been the type of person who followed rules without question. At 28, she worked as a night shift nurse at St. Mary's Hospital, dedicating her life to helping others. Her routine was simple and predictable: work 12-hour shifts, grab coffee at the all-night diner on 5th Street, and drive home through the quiet suburban streets of Millbrook. That Tuesday evening started like any other. Sarah finished her shift at exactly 6 in the morning, her scrubs still carrying the faint smell of antiseptic and her mind buzzing with the events of another busy night. 3 car accident victims, 2 emergency surgeries, and countless smaller cases had kept her running from room to room. All she wanted was her usual large coffee with 2 sugars and the peaceful drive home. The diner sat on a corner lot, its neon sign flickering in the early morning light. Sarah parked her modest Honda Civic in the small lot behind the building, away from the main street where delivery trucks occasionally rumbled past. She had been coming here for 3 years, ever since starting at the hospital. And the elderly owner, Mrs. Chen, always had her order ready before she even asked. As Sarah walked around the building toward the front entrance, she noticed a police cruiser parked across the street. This was not unusual. Officers often stopped by for coffee during their shifts. What caught her attention was the officer himself, standing beside his vehicle and staring directly at her. Even from a distance, she could see his imposing figure. Sergeant Rick Dowling was known throughout Millbrook, though not always for the right reasons. Dowling stood 6 feet 3 inches tall with broad shoulders that seemed to stretch his uniform. His reputation preceded him everywhere he went. Some people in town respected his no-nonsense approach to law enforcement, while others whispered about his tendency to overstep boundaries. Sarah had heard stories at the hospital. Nurses and doctors occasionally treated people who claimed Dowling had used excessive force during arrests. But these were just stories, gossip that circulated through the small town like morning fog. Sarah entered the diner and greeted Mrs. Chen with her usual warm smile. The elderly woman beamed back and immediately began preparing Sarah's coffee without being asked. The diner was nearly empty, except for 2 truck drivers sitting at opposite ends of the counter and an elderly man reading a newspaper in the corner booth. "Long night again?" Mrs. Chen asked, her English accented with traces of her homeland. "Always," Sarah replied, counting out exact change from her purse. "But we saved 3 lives, so I call that a good night." Mrs. Chen handed her the steaming cup and patted Sarah's hand gently. "You are a good person. Too many good people work too hard these days." Sarah thanked her and headed back outside, eager to get home before the morning traffic picked up. The sun was beginning to rise, casting long shadows across the empty parking lot. She fumbled with her keys while balancing her coffee, a skill she had perfected over countless early mornings. "Excuse me, miss." The deep voice behind her made Sarah jump slightly. She turned to see Sergeant Dowling approaching from the street. Up close, he looked even more intimidating than from a distance. His face was weathered and stern, with small eyes that seemed to be constantly evaluating everything around him. A thick mustache covered most of his upper lip, and his uniform was pressed to crisp perfection. "Yes, officer," Sarah replied, maintaining the polite tone she used with everyone. "I need to see your identification," Dowling stated, stopping about 3 feet from her. His hand rested casually on his belt, near his radio and other equipment. Sarah was confused. She had done nothing wrong and was simply getting coffee before heading home from work. "Is there a problem?" "I just finished my shift at the hospital and was getting coffee. I didn't ask what you were doing. I asked for your identification." His tone grew more aggressive, and Sarah noticed his chest puffing out slightly. "Of course," Sarah said, setting her coffee on the hood of her car so she could reach for her purse. "I just don't understand why you need it." "I haven't done anything wrong. That's for me to determine," Dowling replied, stepping closer. "There have been reports of suspicious activity in this area, and I'm investigating." Sarah handed him her driver's license, her hands beginning to shake slightly. She had never been in trouble with the law and found the entire situation uncomfortable. Dowling examined the license for what seemed like an unnecessarily long time, occasionally glancing up at her face as if comparing the photo. Sarah Martinez, he read aloud. Says here, you live on Elm Street. That's a nice neighborhood. Expensive houses over there. I rent a small apartment, Sarah clarified, wondering why her living situation was relevant to whatever investigation he claimed to be conducting. Dowling handed back her license, but remained close, too close for Sarah's comfort. She could smell his cologne mixed with coffee and cigarettes. 6 o'clock, just like every morning, Sarah answered, glancing toward the diner, where she could see Mrs. Chen watching through the window with obvious concern. And you come here every morning? Yes, it's part of my routine. Mrs. Chen, inside, can confirm that. Dowling nodded slowly, but something in his expression had changed. His initial professional demeanor was shifting into something that made Sarah increasingly uncomfortable. His eyes moved up and down her figure in a way that had nothing to do with police work. You know, I've been watching you for a while, Dowling said, his voice dropping to a lower, more personal tone. Every morning. Same routine. Pretty nurse. Works hard. Lives alone. The last part sent a chill down Sarah's spine. How did he know she lived alone? More importantly, why had he been watching her? Sarah took a small step backward, bumping into her car door. I think there's been some misunderstanding, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. I haven't done anything wrong, and I really need to get home. I have to work again tonight. I decide when you can leave, Dowling replied, his tone now completely abandoning any pretense of professional conduct. See, the thing about this neighborhood is that it can be dangerous for a woman alone. Lots of bad people around. You need protection. Sarah's nursing training had taught her to recognize danger, and every instinct was now screaming warnings. This was not a routine police interaction. This was something else entirely. Something that made her skin crawl and her heart race. I appreciate your concern, but I feel perfectly safe, Sarah managed to say, reaching behind her for the car door handle. Dowling stepped closer again, now close enough that Sarah could see the individual whiskers in his mustache and the small scar above his left eyebrow. Safety isn't something you feel, sweetheart. It's something I provide. And I think you and I should discuss your safety more privately. The way he said privately made Sarah's stomach turn. She realized that this man, this supposed protector of the community, was using his position and authority to intimidate her. She thought about all the stories she had heard, all the whispered conversations at the hospital, and suddenly they seemed much more credible. I really need to go, Sarah said firmly, finally grasping the door handle behind her. No, Dowling said, his voice hardening again. You need to understand something about respect, about showing proper appreciation for those who keep you safe. Before Sarah could react, Dowling grabbed her arm just above the wrist. His grip was strong, tight enough to leave marks, and Sarah felt a surge of fear unlike anything she had experienced before. She looked toward the diner, hoping Mrs. Chen or someone else might intervene. But the windows were tinted, and she could not be sure anyone could see what was happening. Let go of me, Sarah said, surprised by the strength in her own voice. Instead of releasing her, Dowling's grip tightened. I don't think you understand the situation you're in. This is my town, my beat, and I decide how things go around here. Sarah's mind raced. Her nursing training had included basic self-defense courses, and she knew that the next few moments would determine how this encounter ended. She could feel Dowling's intentions becoming clearer, and she understood that calling out for help might not be enough. Please, she said, trying a different approach. You're hurting me. Not yet, I'm not, Dowling replied with a cold smile that made Sarah's blood freeze. The parking lot remained empty, except for the two of them. The morning sun cast everything in a golden light that should have been beautiful, but now felt ominous and threatening. Sarah realized that her routine, her predictable schedule, had made her a target. Someone had been watching, learning her patterns, waiting for the right moment. She thought about her patients back at the hospital, about Mrs. Chen inside the diner, about her small apartment where her cat would be waiting for breakfast. All of these normal, everyday things seemed suddenly precious and far away. Sarah Martinez had always believed in following rules and trusting authority, but she was beginning to understand that sometimes authority could not be trusted at all. Dowling's grip on Sarah's arm tightened as he pulled her away from her car door. The parking lot gravel crunched under their feet as he forced her toward the back corner of the building, away from the street and any potential witnesses. Sarah's coffee cup fell to the ground, splashing brown liquid across the asphalt and her white nursing shoes. "You're making a mistake," Sarah said, trying to keep her voice calm despite the terror building in her chest. "People know I come here. Mrs. Chen will wonder where I went." "Mrs. Chen minds her own business if she knows what's good for her," Dowling replied, his breath now warm against Sarah's ear as he leaned closer. "And you're going to learn to mind yours too." Sarah could feel the rough brick wall of the diner against her back as Dowling continued to maneuver her into the secluded corner. His free hand moved to his radio, and for a brief moment, Sarah hoped he was calling for backup or reporting the situation. Instead, she heard the distinctive click of the radio being turned off. "Can't have any interruptions," Dowling explained with that same cold smile. "This is going to be a very important conversation about community relations." The way he emphasized those last two words made Sarah's skin crawl. She understood now that this was not random, not spontaneous. This was planned, calculated, and she was not the first woman to find herself in this situation with Sergeant Dowling. Sarah's mind flashed to her self-defense training from nursing school. The instructor, a former military woman named Captain Rodriguez, had been very clear about one thing. When facing a larger, stronger attacker, surprise and speed were your best weapons. But Rodriguez had also warned that fighting back against someone in authority carried risks that went far beyond the physical confrontation. "Nobody will believe you," Dowling whispered, as if reading her thoughts. "Who are they going to trust? A respected police sergeant with 15 years of service? Or some nurse who's clearly been drinking?" Sarah smelled alcohol on his breath then and realized that Dowling himself had been drinking. This made him more unpredictable but potentially slower to react. She filed this information away while trying to appear more frightened and submissive than she actually felt. "I haven't been drinking," Sarah protested weakly, playing along with his narrative while actually assessing her options. "That's not what my report will say," Dowling replied. "See, I stopped you because you were driving erratically. Probably came straight from some after-work party with your hospital friends. When I tried to conduct a field sobriety test, you became belligerent and aggressive." As he spoke, Sarah noticed several important details. Dowling's stance was confident but sloppy, suggesting he really had been drinking. His radio was clipped to his left side, and his weapon was on his right. Most importantly, he was standing slightly off balance, favoring his left foot. She remembered Mrs. Chen mentioning once that the sergeant had hurt his ankle chasing someone a few months ago. "Please," Sarah said, injecting more fear into her voice than she actually felt. "I just want to go home." "Oh, you'll go home eventually," Dowling said, pressing closer until Sarah could feel the cold brick through her scrubs. "But first, we need to discuss your attitude problem. The way you questioned my authority back there was very disrespectful." His right hand moved from his belt toward Sarah's face, and she flinched convincingly. But instead of striking her, he traced one finger along her jawline in a gesture that was somehow more threatening than violence would have been. "You see," Dowling continued, "I've been watching you for months. Same routine, same schedule, always alone. Do you know what that tells me? It tells me you don't have anyone who cares about you. No boyfriend picking you up from work. No family calling to check on you. Nobody who would even notice if you didn't come home." The accuracy of his observations stung more than Sarah wanted to admit. She had moved to Millbrook 3 years ago specifically to start fresh, to build a new life away from family drama and a bad relationship. Her independence had been a source of pride, but now she realized it had also made her vulnerable. "You're wrong," Sarah lied. "My boyfriend is waiting for me." Dowling laughed, a sound devoid of humor. Your boyfriend? The imaginary one who never picks you up or drops you off? The one whose car is never at your apartment? Nice try, sweetheart. But I told you, I've been watching. This confirmation that he had been stalking her sent fresh waves of fear through Sarah's body. This was not a random encounter or even a crime of opportunity. This was predatory behavior that had been building for months. What do you want? Sarah asked, abandoning the pretense of not understanding his intentions. I want respect, Dowling replied, his hand moving from her face to her shoulder and then lower. I want appreciation for all the hard work I do, protecting ungrateful people like you. And I want you to understand that in this town, I get what I want. Sarah felt his hand grabbing at her scrub top, and she knew her window for action was closing rapidly. She took a deep breath, centering herself the way Captain Rodriguez had taught them, and prepared to act. Okay, Sarah said quietly, allowing her body to sag slightly, as if she were giving up resistance. I understand. Dowling smiled triumphantly and loosened his grip on her arm just slightly. I knew you were a smart girl. Now, here's what's going to happen. Sarah never let him finish the sentence. Using every ounce of strength she had developed during 3 years of lifting patients and working 12-hour shifts, she drove her knee upward into Dowling's groin with devastating accuracy. The sergeant doubled over with a howl of pain and surprise, his hands instinctively moving to protect himself. But Sarah was far from finished. As Dowling bent forward, she grabbed his head and brought her knee up again. This time, connecting with his nose. She heard the distinct crack of cartilage breaking and saw blood begin to flow immediately. You little... Dowling started to curse, but Sarah was already moving. She spun away from the wall and ran toward her car, her nursing shoes slipping slightly on the gravel but maintaining her balance. Behind her, she could hear Dowling struggling to his feet, his breathing labored and his curses becoming more creative and threatening. Stop, Dowling shouted, his voice thick with blood and rage. I am ordering you to stop. But Sarah had no intention of stopping. She reached her Honda and yanked the door open, throwing herself into the driver's seat. Her hands shook as she tried to insert the key into the ignition, and for one terrifying moment, she thought it would not start. The engine turned over just as Dowling reached her car. His face was a mask of blood and fury, his uniform now disheveled and stained. He pounded on her window with his fist, leaving bloody handprints on the glass. This isn't over, he screamed as Sarah threw the car into reverse. I know where you live. I know where you work. You just made the biggest mistake of your life. Sarah backed out of the parking space with more speed than caution, nearly hitting a delivery truck that was turning into the lot. The truck driver honked and gestured angrily, but Sarah barely noticed. All her attention was focused on getting away from the diner and from Dowling. As she pulled onto the main street, Sarah could see Dowling in her rearview mirror. He was standing in the middle of the parking lot, wiping blood from his face with one hand while reaching for his radio with the other. Even from a distance, she could see his lips moving rapidly as he spoke into the device. Sarah's mind raced as she drove through the early morning streets of Millbrook. She knew that Dowling would try to spin this situation to his advantage, probably claiming that she had attacked him during a routine investigation. Her word against his would not be enough, especially given his 15 years of service and her status as a relative newcomer to the community. But as she drove, Sarah began to smile despite her terror, because she had something that Dowling did not know about, something that might just level the playing field. 3 months ago, following a series of break-ins in her neighborhood, Sarah had installed a small security camera in her car. The device was designed to record continuously while the car was parked, primarily to catch potential vandals or thieves. But it would also have recorded everything that had just happened in the diner parking lot. Sarah's hands were still shaking as she pulled into her apartment complex, but her mind was already working on the next steps. She needed to secure the recording, contact someone in authority who could not be influenced by Dowling, and prepare for the battle she knew was coming. Because Sergeant Rick Dowling had been right about one thing, this was far from over. But he had also made a critical mistake in underestimating the quiet nurse who had just left him bleeding and humiliated in a parking lot. His reputation and career hanging in the balance. Sarah sat in her small apartment, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had grown cold while she stared at her laptop screen. The security footage played in a small window, showing everything that had happened in the diner parking lot with crystal clarity. The camera angle captured Dowling's face perfectly, recording every word he had spoken and every inappropriate action he had taken. The quality was even better than Sarah had hoped. The audio was clear enough to hear Dowling's threats, his admission of stalking her, and his clear abuse of authority. Most damning was the moment when he turned off his radio, proving that he had intentionally isolated the situation from official oversight. Sarah's phone had been ringing constantly for the past hour. Dowling was clearly following through on his threats, trying to control the narrative before she could act. She had ignored every call, instead using the time to make copies of the footage and upload it to 3 different cloud storage services. Whatever happened next, the evidence would be preserved. A knock at her door made Sarah jump, spilling cold tea onto her scrub pants. Through the peephole, she could see a young police officer she did not recognize standing in the hallway with an older man in a suit. Her first instinct was panic. Had Dowling somehow convinced his colleagues to arrest her? "Miss Martinez," the older man called through the door. "My name is Detective Frank Morrison, Internal Affairs. I need to speak with you about an incident this morning." Sarah's heart pounded as she considered her options. She could refuse to answer, but that would only delay the inevitable confrontation. Instead, she decided to take control of the situation from the beginning. "Just a moment," Sarah called back, quickly saving her work and closing the laptop. She grabbed a flash drive containing copies of the footage and slipped it into her pocket before opening the door. Detective Morrison was a man in his 50s with graying hair and tired eyes that suggested he had seen too much during his career. The younger officer stood slightly behind him, notebook ready. Both men looked professional but not hostile. "Miss Martinez, I'm investigating a complaint filed against you this morning by Sergeant Dowling," Morrison began, his voice neutral. "He claims you assaulted him during a routine traffic stop." "That's interesting," Sarah replied, stepping aside to let them enter her small living room. "Because I was going to call Internal Affairs myself to file a complaint against Sergeant Dowling for sexual harassment, stalking, and abuse of authority." Morrison's eyebrows rose slightly, and Sarah saw him exchange a meaningful look with the younger officer. "Would you mind telling us your version of what happened?" Sarah gestured for them to sit on her small couch while she took the chair across from them. "Before I say anything, I want you to know that I have video evidence of everything that occurred this morning." This statement clearly surprised both officers. Morrison leaned forward, his full attention now focused on Sarah. "Video evidence? I have a security camera in my car that was running during the entire encounter," Sarah explained. "It shows Sergeant Dowling stalking me, making inappropriate comments, turning off his radio to avoid oversight, and physically assaulting me before I defended myself." Morrison was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. Sarah could see him recalculating whatever assumptions he had brought to her apartment. "Miss Martinez," Morrison said carefully, "I want you to know that this is not the first complaint we've received about Sergeant Dowling. However, previous allegations have been difficult to substantiate due to lack of evidence." "Well, now you have evidence," Sarah replied, pulling the flash drive from her pocket. "Everything is on here." The younger officer, who had introduced himself as Officer Williams, spoke for the first time. "Ma'am, can you walk us through exactly what happened, starting from when you arrived at the diner?" Sarah spent the next 30 minutes providing a detailed account of the morning's events. She was careful to stick to facts, describing Dowling's words and actions without editorializing or speculating about his motives. Both officers took extensive notes, occasionally asking for clarification on specific details. "This surveillance footage," Morrison said when Sarah finished her account, "would you be willing to let our technical team examine it to verify its authenticity?" "Of course," Sarah replied. "I want this handled properly." I want justice, not revenge. Morrison nodded approvingly at her answer. I need to tell you that Dowling's story is quite different from yours. He claims you were driving erratically, that you became belligerent when he tried to conduct a sobriety test, and that you attacked him without provocation. The video will show who's telling the truth, Sarah said simply. There's something else, Williams added, glancing at Morrison before continuing. Sergeant Dowling came to the station this morning with injuries consistent with what you've described, a broken nose and bruising. He's claiming you attacked him with a weapon. Sarah almost laughed. The only weapon I used was my knee. And I only used it after he grabbed me, pushed me against a wall, and made it clear what he intended to do. Morrison studied Sarah's face for several seconds before speaking again. Miss Martinez, I want you to understand something. Sergeant Dowling has been with the department for 15 years. He has commendations, a clean service record, and support from many people in the community. Bringing charges against him will not be easy, even with video evidence. I understand that, Sarah replied. But I also understand that if I don't do anything, he'll do this to someone else. Maybe someone who doesn't have security cameras or self-defense training. The detective nodded slowly. That's exactly what we're hoping to prevent. Over the next 2 hours, Sarah provided a formal statement and handed over the original memory card from her security system. Morrison assured her that the department would conduct a thorough investigation and that she would be protected from any retaliation. 3 days later, Sarah was working her usual night shift when she received a text from Detective Morrison. Dowling arrested this morning. Video evidence corroborated your statement. 3 other women have come forward with similar allegations. Thank you for your courage. Sarah stared at the message for several minutes, feeling a mix of relief, vindication, and sadness for the other women who had suffered in silence. She thought about Mrs. Chen at the diner, who had hugged her when she returned the next day to give her statement. The elderly woman had whispered that she had seen everything through the window and had been prepared to call for help, but Sarah had handled the situation before she could act. The trial took place 4 months later. Sarah testified clearly and calmly, walking the jury through every detail of that morning at the diner. The video evidence was played multiple times, and expert witnesses confirmed its authenticity. The 3 other women who had come forward told their own stories of encounters with Dowling that followed similar patterns of stalking, isolation, and abuse of authority. Dowling's defense attorney tried to portray him as a dedicated officer who had made poor judgments but was not a criminal. The strategy failed completely when the video clearly showed his predatory behavior and deliberate abuse of his position. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all charges: stalking, sexual harassment, assault, and violation of civil rights under color of authority. Dowling was sentenced to 8 years in prison and permanently banned from law enforcement. 6 months after the trial, Sarah received a letter from a young woman named Jessica, a college student who had been working late shifts at a local restaurant. Jessica wrote that she had heard about Sarah's case and wanted to thank her for coming forward. Apparently, Dowling had begun following Jessica in the weeks before his arrest, and she believed she would have been his next victim. Sarah kept the letter in her desk drawer at home, reading it whenever she wondered whether she had done the right thing. The answer was always the same. She had not just defended herself that morning behind the diner. She had protected every woman Dowling might have targeted in the future. The small town of Millbrook changed after the trial. There was new oversight of the police department, mandatory training on appropriate conduct, and a clear message that abuse of authority would not be tolerated. Mrs. Chen still had Sarah's coffee ready every morning, but now she always smiled and said, "My brave girl," when she handed over the cup. Sarah continued working at the hospital, helping patients and saving lives. But she also began teaching self-defense classes for women at the community center, sharing the skills that Captain Rodriguez had taught her years earlier. Every time a new student successfully demonstrated the techniques, Sarah remembered that morning in the parking lot and felt proud of what she had accomplished. The sergeant who had thought he could intimidate and assault her with impunity was now serving time in a state penitentiary. His 15 years of service meant nothing compared to the evidence of his crimes, and his position of authority had become his downfall rather than his protection. Sarah Martinez had learned that sometimes following rules was not enough. Sometimes you had to be willing to fight back, to stand up for yourself and others, even when the odds seemed impossible. She had turned what could have been her worst day into the moment that stopped a predator and protected her community. The quiet nurse who had just wanted her morning coffee had become something more powerful, a woman who refused to be a victim and who had the courage to ensure that justice was served.